And it doesn't get any better inside the oil pan. Definitely chunked it. We look up, it exploded the windage tray. There's dents all through there. It's pretty bad. What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Slow Restoration. If you remember, this past summer I picked up a Yukon Denali XL to part out. Well, actually, I wasn't sure if I was going to part it out or not, but that was kind of the video. I picked it up. We were trying to decide what to do with it. It had a 6-liter in it, of course, that was hurt. I knew it was when I bought it, but we didn't know to what extent. I did try to start it in that video, and it sounded like it had little to no compression. And there's good reason to that. We'll get to that in a second. But obviously, we ended up parting out that Yukon, pulling the engine out because, again, I just wasn't sure exactly what was going on. I didn't know what was going to be usable. I was hoping the block was going to be usable. It is not. But let's go ahead and jump into it. What I think happened here is if you look at the water pump gasket, especially right there, it's got a chunk missing. And I don't think that happened when I took it apart. Normally these would have a steel shim gasket with O-rings, and someone obviously replaced this water pump and put these paper gaskets on, and it looked like it failed. And even if you look here at the block, the rest of this block's fairly clean, but it looks like it was leaking there for a while. I think it had a coolant leak. They didn't realize it. The guy was already frustrated. The story I got was it had low oil pressure. Took it into the shop to get it fixed, and it came out with still low oil pressure and an oil leak. So I guess the shop just didn't know what they were doing, and I don't know if that's when the water pump was replaced or if that was before that, but I think this gasket blew out. I think it got low on coolant. I think it overheated. He was frustrated at that point and just kept running this thing. So if we look inside here, it has been sitting a while, so that's why the rust built up in the cylinders. That's fine. We'll get to, it looks like a bunch of rocks and some metal. That looks like a ring there, and more metal chunks. Obviously this piston looks cleaned off like almost brand new. Again, a good reason for that. This one isn't, but it either overheated and blew a head gasket, or when we go to the other side, you'll see a little bit more of the Carnage. There's even metal chunks, pieces of the piston down in the valley here. It's pretty brutal. So here's the heads that came off of it. We got a stuck valve here. I didn't even see that before, but valve stuck open, so we have a couple bent valves, and that's because of all this metal floating around. This side, we get down to that one. Yeah, it's pretty brutal. Actually, the whole end of the spark plug, I didn't notice that before either. There's a spark plug screwed into it. There's nothing coming out this side, so that was pretty brutal. So let's jump on the other side here. First cylinder is okay. Second cylinder, very much not okay. The rest of them on this side probably weren't horrible, but a complete failure here. Rod still intact. Wrist pin is actually still floating around. This was an 05 or 06, I believe. So I think it is a floating, well, it is a floating pin. So we can move it around there. So the rod did bend. Obviously the piston, I didn't touch any of this. This is just the way it is, or it happened to be when I pulled the head. So we're completely missing a piston, and I'm sure you've seen it by now, but cylinder is completely destroyed. So this block is totally junk, cracked in multiple locations. If I move the rod out of the way, you can see how that was just beating against that cylinder wall, cracked it right down the center and on either side. So that rod and wrist pin were just wreaking havoc. Oddly enough, the top of it doesn't look bad, top of the cylinder, but you know, gravity and the rotation of the crank are just going to keep pounding that in there. So whatever happened here, this piston failed completely. I guess they just kept running it. I don't know if he was on the highway or what. Kept running it. This piston completely disintegrated, fell apart, gone. Rings, you know, the whole piston left the ring, the wrist pin. And when that happens, it sent that metal all through the engine. Again, some metal chunks up here. You can see some glitter through here. So that's about as far as I got on it. Obviously, I haven't pulled the pan. I can look through and see it does still have the timing chain on it. That was kind of my first suspicion, is the timing chain or something. The timing broke because it like I said, it had little to no compression. It did try to fire. I guess a couple of these cylinders still had enough pressure in them. It was trying to fire, but you know, with a cylinder completely missing and a couple bent valves and all that stuff, it's not going to run. So yes, this block is trashed. We will be able to salvage some stuff off of it. I'm going to go ahead and pull the balancer off because I have another engine with a chipped balancer. So this is still good. We'll take some of the bracketry, like valley cover, the front cover. We'll get all that cleaned up and maybe powder coat them for another engine. All the bolts and stuff we can get cleaned up. So like for instance, there's an engine we're freshening up. We have the block painted. Everything else has to come off. And we'll have all these bolts off this donor scrap engine. We'll get all that cleaned up, have them ready to go. So when we do an engine like that, we pull it apart, we have fresh bolts ready, already cleaned up, ready to go back in, and save us a little bit of time as we're doing this stuff. Probably gonna pull the oil pan and just inspect. So again, if you hear an engine noise, or you know, something on your gauges doesn't look right, probably best to pull over and check it out. Again, this guy was very frustrated because of the low oil pressure and then the oil leak also, after taking it and spending some pretty good money at a shop. So he was done with it. He says he actually told me if it blew up, he didn't care because he got his money's worth out of the vehicle anyway. And obviously he didn't care because that's ugly. So as far as these heads go too, me personally, this one's damaged, so this head's trashed, the whole head, and it's a 3/17 head, so it's nothing special. I have a bunch of these sitting around, and even this one, I was thinking we may be able to salvage this head, but with the bent valves, I'm not even going to take a chance. This is going right in the scrap pile too, because chances are if it did that much damage and that valve's hanging down that low, it may have cracked the guide, and if this thing did overheat, had maybe warped, we don't know, we don't care. In the scrap pile these go. I just can't imagine the noise that made as that thing let go. Crazy. And it's pretty impressive. The rod actually stayed intact. Again, it did bend. It is free. I don't even think it spun the bearing. It's free on the crank end of it too. Keeps getting hung up on that cylinder because it's cracked, but all that seems good. I mean, there's no play in it. It's pretty amazing. These Gen 4, this should be Gen 4 rods. I know it's a Gen 3 engine. You can see by the knock sensor bosses, but being a 05, 06, I think by then they started changing over to the Gen 6 stuff. So this does have, like I said, the floating pin, which is amazing. It still works too. From the external, even here where that cracked cylinder is, it never came through the side of the block. So again, it's amazing how strong these iron blocks are. And honestly, it's a miracle that that block didn't poke through, or that rod didn't poke through the side of the block. But yeah, we're gonna keep going here, and we'll get this one off the stand in the scrap pile, and move on to one more. I do have another Hurt LS, so this is kind of the second in the series. The first one was that aluminum block. This one I knew was hurt pretty bad because of the very low compression. Didn't think it was this bad, but it is. So Another 6-liter coming up we need to diagnose. I kind of know a little bit before we even get into it about what happened to it and what's wrong with it, but it's still fun to kind of rip and tear and see carnage. And I did discover something else that explains a little bit more why this thing sounded the way it sounded. As I said, there is a timing chain on it, but it is broke. It's completely separated, so probably what happened most likely is a chunk of that piston went down, wedged itself. You can actually see right there on the chain, something smacked it, aluminum. There's shavings here, piled up here. So something got in there and just ripped the chain in two. You can't run something in between the gear and the chain. It'll break the chain, which is what happened. So with that, to me, yes, you could clean this pan up. The bottom sump pan, whatever you want to call this, does unbolt. You can pull that out. You could hot tank this, clean it all up, scrape it down, whatever you want to do. But to me, it's not worth it because there's a chance that this kind of stuff floating around inside this engine and flying around like bullets, really, good chance to put a hairline crack in this pan somewhere, and we're just not, these pans aren't that much money. We have a couple more around, so we're going to put this one back on, and this whole thing is headed for the scrap pile.